Okay, recording in progress. Good morning, everybody. So we are near the end of Daf Kaf Tet Amud Aleph. We spoke yesterday. We spoke about this idea of the Gemara told us was talking about this birur amidot or mitzvah amidot, and talking about the idea of gezel. If you had stolen something and you don't know, there is. By the way, gezel is one of those very interesting mitzvot where we have a lav, what's called a lav anitak leaseh, right? Where you have a mitzvah, you have a negative prohibition, and then you have a positive mitzvah, which is to correct the negative mitzvah. That's what it's connected. It's called a lav anitak leaseh. Always when you have all these svarim that talk about the Taryag mitzvot, and there's all this idea that a person is meant to fulfill all Taryag mitzvot. A person is not meant to fulfill all Taryag mitzvot. It's a very interesting. Some of those are mitzvot. Most of them are mitzvot lekatchila that we're meant to fulfill. But there are mitzvot that you're not meant to fulfill lekatchila. It's in a b'diavad situation. But if you are in that situation, you have to fulfill that mitzvah. So, for example, if a person gets divorced, chas v'chalila, lo aleinu, but a person finds himself in a situation of a marriage that does not work out, they have to divorce, so then there is a mitzvah to write a get. There's no mitzvah for every person to lekatchila write a get. That's not something we want people to do. Okay, but that's a situation. So if you steal, if somebody stole the gezel, so then there's a lavani takla say that says ve'shivita gazela, that to return that which you stole. We should not now be going out and stealing things in order that we can return the theft. That is not the way it works. By the way, this is why, according to some poskim, there is no mitzvah of tshuva. Right? There's a well-known, there's a discussion, there's a bit of a steer on the Rambam between the introduction between Sefer HaMitzvot and Mishnah Torah. But is there a mitzvah of tshuva? Or is there a mitzvah of vidoy? In Ilchot Tshuva, he writes kashe ya'aseh tshuva. Ram does not write that one is obligated to do tshuva. He says when you do tshuva, this is how you do it. Then you have a mitzvah of vidoy, right? So the Minchas Chinuch famously says there is no mitzvah of tshuva. There is no mitzvah. We can understand it that in order for there to be a mitzvah, it means you have to do something wrong. So therefore, it's not going to be a mitzvah. Okay, so that's an interesting discussion. But in any event, so if a person is unable to fulfill the mitzvah of giving the gezel back, he doesn't know where he stole from, so then he should, based on the Gemara and other ideas, is that he should give to the tzorchei rabim. He should do it in such a way that the person who was stolen from is going to benefit. It doesn't mean that any time a person is stolen, he's too embarrassed to go back and give the money back, that he can just go and tzorchei rabim. No, he has to. It's only if he doesn't know, and there's no way for him to identify who and how. Right? In our case, in the Gemara, we said they were told they don't have to. It was unwittingly, it wasn't intentional, etc. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva of somebody who stole from the Kupat Tzedakah. Somebody who stole from the Kupat Tzedakah, what should he do? So he says that he can give the money back to the Kupat Tzedakah, but he has to do it in such a way that is completely anonymous. Because what? You're going to go and you're going to go on the scroll of honor with all the money that you gave to Tzedakah. You didn't give any money to Tzedakah. You stole it all and you're giving it back. So that's be done in such a way that he's not actually benefiting from it. Okay, so that was the idea of Gezer and Sochei Rabim. Beseder. So 4 lines from the bottom. 4 lines from the bottom of the amud, we said, Ad Belei of Chisda Ravana Ukva, V'darash lo yimdod adam psulim v'yiten lifnei behemto b'yom tov, aval kodeu kavo kabayim v'notein leto lifnei behemto. You can't measure out the amount of serim that you're going to feed for the animal. That's similar to the way you would do it for Mekach or Memkar. But if you take the cup, you take the measurement, and you just put it inside the pile of grain and take it out, that is okay. V'nachtum moded tavlin v'notein letoch kederato kedei shelo yakdiach tavshilo. A cook, the word nachtum often means a baker. In this context, Rashi tells us it means a cook. Then he is allowed to measure out the spices so the food doesn't go bad. So there's an interesting discussion here amongst the Mefarshim. Why does the Gemara say nachtum? Right? We've had other cases, for example, it says isham malata kedera. Right? We had a case where it says a woman who's cooking can fill up the pot. So does that mean, so there are those who say that the Gemara said nachtum dafka, meaning he's allowed to measure it because a cook is cooking in very, very large quantities and it's much harder to know and you can't. So he's allowed to go and he's allowed to measure, but an ordinary person cooking at home would not be allowed to measure. There are those who say no, nachtum is it's just a diber b'lashon oveh, meaning who cooks? The cook cooks. So therefore, that's why the Gemara used that language. But it would apply to everybody. So there are differences of opinion exactly why it says specifically nachtum. Okay. Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav. מודדת אישה קמח ביום טוב, ונותנת לתוך עיסתה, כדי שתיטול חלה בעין יפה. So Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says, in the name of Rav, a woman is allowed to measure the flour on Yom Tov in order that she knows how much flour there is, so she can take out the requisite amount of challah. So Rashi over here says, Rashi says, ba'ayin yafa, it says, שיעור חלה אחד מכף ד' לכהן, וכשאינה יודעת מידת עיסתה, היא מקמצת. Right, there's different measurements that you would take out. Ba'ayin yafa, you want to take a nice amount. So if she doesn't know exactly how much there is, she's going to be a little bit more stingy. ואומרת, אין כאן כל כך. She's saying there's not so much yam. I'm only going to take a little bit. אבל כשיודעת מידת עיסתה, יודעת מה תפריש ואינה יפה בה. If she knows how much she's got, then she knows how much to take. And nowadays, we're going to take a little bit anyway, so this would not apply. Ushmuel amar asu. Okay, so we're now on the last line. The last line on Daf Kaftet Amud Aleph, right? Rav said in the name of Rav, that you're allowed to measure the flour to know how much challah to take. Shmuel amar asu. Shmuel says no, you can't. V'ha'tanat ve'shmuel mutar was not taught. Right? Tanat ve'shmuel said that it was mutar. So Marabaye hashtad amar Shmuel asu. V'tanat ve'shmuel mutar. Shmuel halacha lemase atar lashmuinan. Meaning, when Shmuel said that it's asur, he was going to teach us halacha lemase, and therefore we have to follow that. So why did they say? Therefore in Dvei Shmuel, right? In Dvei Shmuel that it's mutar. Sorry, they said that it's mutar, and Shmuel said it's asur. So have a look at Rashi. The Rashi at the end of Amud Aleph. He says Tana Dvei Shmuel, but Tosefta shesidel Shmuel mitanaim, and Tosefta which Shmuel composed, arranged based on Tanaim shelfanav. כמו שסידרו רבי חייא ורבי יושעיה, וכמו שסידר רבי את המשנה, right? Just like Rabbi arranged the Mishnah and Rabbi Chiya and Rabbi Yoshaya arranged the Braitot, so too we had a Tana Devei Shmuel. Shmuel had these kvatzim, these psakim of the Tanaim that he put together, and there he said that it was mutar, and now he's saying it's asur. So it says Rashi Hashad Amar Shmuel asur, v'hu shana b'mishnato mutar. I mean, he taught in his Mishnah, so to speak, that it was mutar, and now he's telling us Shmuel b'shmatei damar asur halacha l'maaseh atar shmuinan. So if he's saying it now, obviously he's saying halacha l'maaseh. Shabalish o halacha l'asod maaseh morin lo asur. In other words, seems to be teaching us that this is maybe halacha ve'ein morin ken. That if somebody comes to ask you, you tell them that it's asur. V'chazin ani nishta'avid lo machinam biyadei halacha mutar ve'ein morin ken. Okay, so this is another instance. We had one on the previous stuff. Here another instance seems to be of halacha ve'ein morin ken. This time the Gemara does not explicitly say at this point that's halacha ve'ein morin ken, but that's how Rashi understands that Shmuel really had taught that it was mutar, but here he's actually saying that it's asur. So meaning if somebody comes and asks you, you say asur. That's what halacha ve'ein morin ken means. But if you see somebody who's doing it, you actually know that ikar din is mutar, and therefore there's no need to protest. Okay. Next topic. So we're at the top of Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan. En shonin kemach beyom tov. Mishum Rabbi Papias Rabbi Yehuda ben Peter omrim shonin v'shavin she'im nafal letochan sror kesam shesh shonin. So shonin, the word this refers to sifting the flour. They would sift the flour twice. They would do it once before Yom Tov, and then they would do it again just before they went to bake it. So it says here Rashi, ein shonin kemach sherakdu me'etmol. It was sifted or winnowed yesterday. In order to make sure that it doesn't have anything bad in it, you want to have very, very nice flour, so you want to sift it again. You could have done it before Yom Tov, so we don't allow it again. Shonin says the leika tilcha v'davar hanilehi shezoi pam shniya v'en zekim market lebura. Okay, that's according to one who says you would be allowed to say there's no great tircha because you've already sifted it and it's not the same as market, it's borer, etc. So the second sifting, are you right again? The word shonin sounds like shniya, sounds like you're repeating, right? That's why we use that word. So are you allowed to do the second sifting of the flour on Yom Tov? Tan Rabbanan Ein Shonin Kemach Yom Tov. Right. So Tanna Kama says no. Mishum Rabbi Papios Val Biyodabim Batel Amur Shonin. They said you're allowed to. V'shavin, but everybody agrees. She'im nafala tochot tzor kesam sheshonin. Right. That if something like a stone or a chip of wood fell into the flour, then you're allowed to go. Then you're allowed to go and sift it according to everybody. Tani Tana Kamei de Ravina, Ein Shonin Kemach B'Yom Tov, Avan Nafal Tzor Kesam Bolel Beyado. So it was taught in front of Ravina that what? That you don't sift it on Yom Tov, but if something fell, so you can sort of sort of sift it with your hand. Amale Kol Sheken Dasul Davale Kebolel. So that's what they said to Ravina. So Ravina said, no. He said, all the more so, that's worse. Because that is like, borer. Darash Rabba Baravona Zulte Apitcha de Naharda Shonin Kemach B'Yom Tov. Okay, so now as you can see, we have different opinions here in the Tanaim regarding this halacha. So here, Rabba Baravona Zute, right? He was in the Apitcha de Naharda, meaning at the entrance to the city of Naharda. So he taught Shonin Kemach B'Yom Tov. He said you can sift, do the second sifting of the flour on Yom Tov. So Amarlahu of Nachman Puku v'amu leila Abba. Rav Nachman says to him, right, go and say Abba ya refers to Rava. He says, go and tell him, right, Shekila tivutach ushadi achizre. Says Rashi, Shekila tivutach, ein anu machzikin lecha tova, bekach netula hi tovatach, umutelet ala kotzim, tivutach balaz. In other words, right, we meaning we don't accept what you said. Meaning they have to, he's coming along and saying, in other words, the fact that you came along and said that this is mutar, so we already know that they've already been teaching us in the Hauda that you are allowed to go and you're allowed to sift this flour again, right? In other words, we don't. There's no need for your heter. There's no chidush there. Puk chazi kama maolata hadan ben halda. Look, and everybody in the Hauda is going around and is sifting their flour on Yom Tov. Okay. Now another story about this. The vitud of Yosef ne'ala kimcha agava de mahulta. Okay, so here's a story where we find that it's not so simple. Maybe it's necessary to do the sifting with some sort of a shinoi, right? So the vitud of Yosef. So if Yosef's wife, she would sift the flour. We're talking about the second sifting over here. How would she do it? Agava de mahulta, meaning on the back, using the back side of the sifter. Rashi says, "Ba'achulei hanapa kadei l'shanot," using the back of the sift in order to make a change. Okay, I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but that's what it says. Samala chazi de ana rifta maliata ba'ina. So why are you doing this? I want rifta ma'alia means nice bread. The way that you're doing it with the shinoi, the bread is the flour is not going to be quality. It's not going to come out. The vitud of Ashi Nyalakimcha Agaba de Ptola. Okay, so another story here is that, in other words, what Rav Yosef seems to be saying is there's no need for the shinoi. You can do it in the ordinary fashion. Rav Yosef, that was Rav Yosef, right? The vitud of Ashi Nyalakimcha Kimcha. She would also, Rav Ashi's wife would also sift the flour the second time. Agaba de Ptola. Using the table, would sift using the side of the back of the table. Again, I'm not sure exactly how one does this, but the point is that there is a certain shinoi. So Marav Ashi Didan Balte de Rami Bar Chama. Rav Ashi's wife was the daughter of Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama Maradu Uvda Ava. Rabbi Bar Chama had he was a very frum yid, as you would say. He right, he was makpid on these things. The lavda chazir and benasha lo hava avda, meaning she saw that from her father's home, and that's the way that they would do it. So therefore, that is a sign that that is allowed. Very interesting. That story. That's something that we have many times. You know, the Gemara will say, "Puk chazim mayam amadavar." There are certain things that we know based on the Masara, based on the fact that we do them and they're allowed. And that's how Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was asked about making egg salad on Shabbat, right? So he says, I know that it's mutar. So why do I know it's mutar? Because my grandmother did it, and her grandmother did it, and her grandmother did it, right? That's we not now we have to go. Now we have to figure out what's the head there, and why is it not lash, and why is it not tochen, and why is it not any of these things. But so Rashi's saying, so if this is the tradition she got in the house, if Rabbi Bar Chama's daughter, so her father did it or her mother did it, so of course that's allowed, and you're allowed to sift the flour in that way. Okay. None of this is really so practical nowadays. Most of us are not going to be sifting flour on Yom Tov. Most of us are not sifting flour on Chol. You know, you buy the pre-sifted, and then it's okay. But that is the principle that emerges. All right, so we'll stop there. Bezrat Hashem, we will have another share on Som Gedalia. Okay, that's next Thursday morning. And in the meantime, Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova, K'tiva v'chatima tova.
Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.